another phenomenal beauty. Telling your body to come along, cause white lines blow away. Shush. Blow. Get higher, baby. Get higher, baby. Get higher, girl.
What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Movie Squak, a series where we discuss a movie of our own choosing. I'm Kyle, and with me are the usual Gigi, Hannah, and Trevor.
What's up?
Second Kyle.
Boy.
And this week was actually my movie pick.
We let
Yeah.
him pick a movie.
Who allowed this? So I decided to pick one of my personal favorites. It's a movie called Shaun of the Dead. It is a horror comedy, and it is rated R for blood and guts and lots of
Sex.
lots of dirty language. There's no sex.
Dirty language.
Well, yeah, it's not clean language.
Dirty language.
Yeah, they say the C word
They do. Which is very common, I think, right? For them.
For them, yeah.
for English.
Them and
Yeah,
Aussies.
Aussies.
it's a British film or English. It's the same thing, isn't it? Either one.
I don't know. I'm not from there.
It takes place in London, so there you go, London. Yeah, it stars Simon Pegg and Nick Frost and Kate Ashfield and some other people. The old dude, the stepdad, I figured out his name is Bill Nye, which I thought is kind of funny because it's not
Nice.
the science guy. It's just an English actor.
He's actually anti-science.
Yeah,
He was Dracula.
was he?
Yeah. He plays Dracula in Dracula something. Hold on. I'll look it up.
Okay.
With
Well,
Keanu Reeves.
while she's
Doesn't
doing
mean he's
that,
pro-science.
well, Dracula's not a scientist, is he?
No.
He was also a vampire king in the Underworld series.
That's right.
Oh, yeah. So, all I know is he's a pretty popular actor. He's been in a lot of things. I just haven't seen a lot of him. I know he's in
He's
this
still
movie.
alive.
Yeah, he's in this movie, and then he's also in another movie by the same people that made this one, Hot Fuzz. Briefly in that one, but anyway. So this movie was written by Edgar Wright and Simon Pegg, and it was directed by Edgar Wright. Basically, the main sort of little synopsis is our main protagonist, Shaun. He struggles to keep his dying relationship alive with his girlfriend Liz, and he tries to juggle that with his pretty boring life. I mean, he's got a dead-end job, and he lives in a very small apartment with two roommates. One's his best friend, and the other is a college friend that
Peter.
he's no longer that close with. And Pete and Ed, Sean's best friend, they have a pretty big feud going on. They don't really like each other. And then with all that happening, there's also a zombie apocalypse that's happening underneath, and it comes to the surface about halfway through the movie. And he also has his mom, Barbara, who's a sweet old lady who lives down the street, and his stepdad, Philip, who he never really got along with growing up. And yeah. So what I've gathered from watching this movie a lot in my time is that it's kind of separated into three parts. So I'm going to kind of talk about each part, and we can go over some of the big moments from each part and how it works or maybe doesn't work for the movie, and just kind of go from there. So the first act is, I called it the beginning of the end. So the movie basically begins with Shaun and Liz having a conversation about their relationship, and it's pretty much on its last leg. And Liz is trying to sort of give him an ultimatum, telling him that he needs to be able to do more stuff with her and break out of this habit of just coming to the Winchester, which is their favorite place to go, or Shaun's favorite place to go, every night. And she tells him over and over that he basically just needs to do something with his life. And Shaun never understands that concept, at least at the beginning of the film. So he basically fails miserably to keep her as his girlfriend, and she dumps him for being unreliable. And this day, it's not only the end of their relationship, but it's also the beginning of the end of the world, as the city begins to go through some odd occurrences. There's a few things that Shaun notices during his last day at work, like there's people dropping to the floor or passed out in cars, causing traffic jams. There's a lot of army trucks that are just randomly driving all over the streets, probably a lot more than what anyone would usually see. And then one of the more interesting ones that I thought kind of didn't really make sense for the film was the one where there was like this older dude in like this little patch of grass, and he was like hitting at these pigeons who weren't flying away when he was like swinging at them. And then eventually he grabs one, and then it looks like he's about to eat it, and then a bus passes by.
Yeah.
And then after that, he's just gone. And I thought that was a little odd, because the movie is not, like, I don't know what that was. If that was like something Shaun was just seeing, or if it was meant to hint at like some kind of supernatural thing. Like, it didn't really make sense to me. And I thought it was kind of interesting. But anyway, going back to the summary, basically, besides those few occurrences that Shaun sees, him and Ed are basically oblivious to anything out of the ordinary. That night, after Liz dumps him, Shaun goes to the pub to meet Ed, who was probably already there and was going to be there, whether Shaun was going to be there or not. But they basically just drink the night away. They both stumble home, and they try to blow off more steam, only to discover that their roommate Pete, he's been bitten, which is odd. It's not a normal thing to come home from work being bitten by someone.
Wait,
Well,
it's not normal?
He was mugged, so
It's what
That's what he
it's
said.
what he says, but
He was
I
mugged
think
by zombies.
yeah, and I think that's just what he was trying to call it. I don't think he was actually mugged. It's just like, I don't
His
know.
brain
you don't
making sense of
know.
it.
We didn't
Yeah.
see that part of the scene.
Obviously, it's not in the movie, but it's just what Pete says, and I think it's just trying to, like Trevor said, just make sense of what happened. But if anyone knows anything about zombies, if you get bitten, you're gonna turn. So yeah, the night ends with Pete basically going off on Shaun and Ed, telling Shaun really that he needs to sort his life out and needs to get rid of Ed because he's not a good influence on him. And that's basically the end of the first third of the movie. It's pretty much the glimpse of quote unquote normal life that we see kind of coming to an end for Shaun, because he doesn't know it yet, but the next day is going to be a hell of a lot more crazy than the previous one. There's one thing that I wanted to talk about really in this first part. I wanted to talk about the scene with Ed and Shaun in the Winchester after Liz broke up with Shaun, and Ed, he's kind of doing his best to cheer Shaun up. And I thought there was some really powerful lines. They were cliche, like he said, but I think it was said well. He
Something like,
says, I'm not gonna bombard you with cliches. I'm not going to tell you that there's plenty of other fish in the sea, but I am gonna say this. it's not the end of the world. And then right after he says that, there's a zombie that's right outside the front door that kind of bangs on the front door and does like this little groan like a zombie would.
Yeah.
And I just thought that was really like I think the line was clever, and I also think that like Hannah said, it's basically foreshadowing the rest of the movie.
Oh well, it goes even deeper than that.
Oh yeah.
It's when he's talking to him about. He says something like, "You know what we should do tomorrow? Should like," and he starts listing out a bunch of things. I think I wrote it down. It says we should. He said something about like we should start drinking like real early. Bloody Mary the first thing, and then we'll get a bite at the king's head, and then a couple at like Little Princess or something like that, and then we'll stagger on about here and there, and then boom, we're back to the bar. That is the entire plot of the movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I
'Cause
never
the
noticed
Bloody Mary is the first chick that they run
that.
into,
Yeah.
and then the bite at the king's head is his is it his
Stepdad.
stepfather? Yeah.
Stepdad.
Yeah.
And then the couple at the Little Princess is when they run into his girlfriend again and her weird roommates.
Flatmates.
Yeah, flatmates.
So, yeah, her flatmates. And then the staggering is when they're, staggering around trying to be like zombies.
Navigate
So
to
that
the bar.
zombies
Yeah.
don't, navigate to the bar, and then boom, they're back at the bar.
Back to the Winchester. Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I never noticed that.
So Kyle's mind was just blown.
It was.
Ed's podcast there.
Yeah, it's crazy because I was probably going to mention it at some point in the podcast that every time I watch this movie, I feel like I'm picking up something else that I missed. So there it is. Yeah, I didn't even think about that. Bloody Mary. That's pretty clever.
Yeah.
Another thing I thought was clever in the first, that goes along with the first act, was there's a couple scenes between Ed and Pete
hmm
that are very also foreshadowing as well.
Yeah.
The movie obviously uses a lot of foreshadowing. That's like the main element.
Yeah, an extreme amount.
Yeah, like almost overkill on the
Yeah.
foreshadowing. But one of the things I thought was clever was there's a moment where Pete and Ed are yelling at each other, and Pete's like, "Hey, you want to live like an animal? Go live in a shed or
Yeah.
whatever."
Yeah.
And he ends up in a shed at the end of the
Yep.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there was another thing that was like Ed was yelling at Pete, and then he's talking to Shaun afterwards. And he's like, "Well, next time I see Pete, he's dead," or whatever.
Yeah.
And he
then the next
literally
time
was,
he sees
yeah.
him, he's literally
Yeah.
dead.
Yeah. Literally.
Just little things like that. But like, it's almost like there were so many lines in that first act that were foreshadowing things that were going to happen that it was
Yeah.
almost too much.
Yeah. Overwhelming foreshadow.
I mean, obviously, on your first watch, like you wouldn't catch that until afterwards and be like, "Oh, I get it."
Yeah.
But
I mean, some
feel
of them are
like,
pretty obvious. That it's gonna be like,
yeah.
oh, yeah, he's dead. Okay, yeah, he's literally gonna be dead next time we see him.
Yeah,
He did that.
exactly.
Sean did that with the soccer kid out front too.
Right.
When he kicks the ball at Sean by accident, and then Sean's like, "Hey, you're dead."
I like that he also kicked the ball at him as a zombie kid.
Yeah, right. Oh man. Yeah, I love how there was a lot of like quick dialogue that just kind of happens. One thing that just popped into my head was the very beginning of the film when Liz is talking to Sean about how he needs to improve their relationship, and she says something like, "It would just be nice if we could," and then she hesitates just long enough for Ed to say "fuck," and then she says, "Spend more time together," and then he says, "Oh, bollocks." And it's just like these quick little things that just like run right by you when you're watching the movie.
I thought it was really interesting. The state that Sean is in when he starts the movie is obviously very zombie-like. Like they're like hitting that on the nose, incredibly hard with
Really,
that.
the whole town is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like they're already zombies.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting how the world like reflects how Shaun is doing at the time, and when he needs it, obviously, when he needs to change, the world changes as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I thought it was interesting. Uh, there's a book that I've read called The Anatomy of Story by John Truby, and
Mm-hmm.
there's a part where he talks about making characters that last and characters that um, kind of are the ones that we remember the best.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I pulled up the quote. It says, uh, to create great characters, think of all your characters as part of a web in which each helps define the others. To put it another way, a character is often defined by who he is not. And I thought that was really interesting in looking at Ed and Pete, because they're kind of the reflections of what Shaun could potentially be in extremes.
Mm.
Like, he's sort of in the middle of being really lazy and also being very productive.
Yeah.
And you see that Ed is potentially what he could be if he keeps going in this very like zombie-like fashion.
Yeah.
You know, he could end up like Ed, just the worst. But if he was like overproductive and a hardworking guy, he could potentially become Pete as well,
Mm-hmm.
who's like very stuck up and very just like matter of fact about his job and everything he does.
Yeah.
So I thought that was interesting that he's like at a stage. He starts the movie in a stage of being in the middle of the two, and he could potentially go either way.
Hmm. That's an interesting point. I like that.
Is
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also liked in the first act. It's very subtle. The end of the world. Um, Obviously, there are shots that I mentioned already where like people are passing out in the middle of the street and causing traffic jams because they're dead at the driver's seat in their car or something like that. But there's some more subtle things like when Shaun, his first trip to the liquor store when the world hasn't ended yet, and he's asking Nelson about the papers, I think. And then he happens to take a quick glance at the papers and he notices that like it's saying stuff about like there's like God, I can't remember the actual what the newspaper said, but it says something about desecrated remains or something like that. And it was basically just like what you would probably hear if a zombie apocalypse was happening on the news. Um, and I thought that was like a nice little attention to detail because there's a lot of that in this movie where it's like you could go without seeing it, but you appreciate it if you catch it, you know.
Yeah.
So I thought that was cool. And then like when he's at work and he tells the rest of his coworkers that both the boss and the second in command are out, quote unquote, sick for the day. They're probably dead and or dying.
yeah.
And he's the next in command, and they're like, "Oh, you're the oldest in command."
Yeah.
I thought that Noel character was super funny, just constantly taking jabs at Shaun. And then the other one I noticed was when Shaun was just helping an employee, or I'm sorry, a customer, because they work at like some kind of tech store, somewhat.
Like a
And
Circuit City no
yeah,
longer exists.
yeah,
R.I.P.
and
Yeah.
and he was showing the customers like some of the channels that would normally be on your cable package, and it was literally like 90% news, and
Yeah.
it was all like basically about zombies and stuff.
Yeah.
But he just wasn't paying attention. But yeah. And then when he got the flowers for his mom, I just like the lady. She's like To a wonderful mom or pow, super mom. But yeah, I
So,
mean, go ahead.
since you brought that up, that was kind of what I wanted to bring up, the thing I caught on or this viewing.
Hmm.
So obviously he has the flowers for his mom for Mother's Day, and then he tries to give them to Liz, but like she sees the card, breaks
Right.
up with him, so he tosses them. And when they're back at the Winchester during the whole zombie apocalypse, Barbara finds the flowers,
Yeah.
and then she picks them up and she goes, "Oh, I think these are for me." But the thing about that part, like after watching it, you know, more than once, like you know that she's been bitten, she's on her way out pretty much. So those aren't like Mother's Day flowers anymore. Those are like funeral flowers.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Damn.
In the morning.
Interesting.
Yeah.
That's a good point. Poor Barbara.
Yeah. R.I.P. Barbs.
Yeah, the Barbs.
Yeah, what's up with all the Barbs being killed?
I know.
We'll get to
Only
Barbs.
solid characters.
um. So yeah, I mean, I think one of the, I guess, gags of the movie. I sort of touched on it a moment ago about how about how Shaun, he, you know, his morning routine basically is going to the liquor store uh to get a Coke. At least that would be what you could assume from when you watch the movie.
Yeah.
Because he does it twice, and one time he does it when the world is quote unquote okay, and then the next morning he does it when the apocalypse has already happened. And it's just interesting to see those two different scenes. The only thing that doesn't change is Shaun, because he is so oblivious to his surroundings that he just walks with his head down to the liquor store and gets what he needs to get and goes back home, and he does it the same exact way the following day.
Although I
Only
do want
there's
to point out on the first one, um, he grabs the Diet Coke first, and
uh,
then he puts it down and he picks up the regular Coke,
uh-huh.
and then like all that shit happens, and then the next day he picks up the regular Coke, puts it down, and picks up the Diet. Like he's trying to make that change for himself to better himself.
Yeah, character development.
Just
It's
a
very
brief second.
slight.
Yeah, I don't know how you
Something
don't
that
notice the blood on the door though.
Yeah.
Like, come
Honestly,
on.
I was trying to figure out if it was like a Halloween decoration or if like it was blood.
No, it was definitely blood, and then he
Oh,
slips
right
on
Because he
it.
on.
slips in it.
Oh man.
Nelson, have you got any papers?
Owe you about 15p. And then I another attention to detail is a lot of the zombies that you see in the movie you see earlier in the film as
Yeah, that's what I
people,
told Trevor.
and I thought that was, I mean, you know, obviously they have probably a certain amount of actors and not a lot of extras, or you know, whatever the case may be, but I thought it was cool that they showed those people alive before they were dead, even if it was just like in the main credits, the opening credits.
Yeah.
But like the one that I see is the guy with the tuxedo who ends up having one arm gone, and he opens the front door after Shaun comes back, and him and Ed fight him off.
Oh,
You see him in the liquor store the day before, alive, right behind Shaun, when he's talking to Nelson, and then when the apocalypse happens and Shaun's in the store trying to talk to Nelson about the papers, Nelson actually comes around the corner as a zombie, and he's like, you know, coming towards Shaun, but Shaun doesn't notice and just walks out the door.
yeah. The one
And then
I noticed
there's,
was Mary.
yeah, Mary.
Yeah.
The two. Well, we'll get into it once we get through everything else, but I want to move on to Act 2, which is what I call Judgment Day. This is kind of a title that was taken from the news anchor that Shaun and Ed were listening to, because that's what he called the day. So I'm going to call it Judgment Day. So basically, the morning begins with Shaun and Ed. Or actually, I think I'm trying to remember. Yeah, I think this is when Shaun, he walks out. It's like the beginning of the day. He goes back to the liquor store. And you, as the viewer, notice that there's a bunch of zombies walking around. And it's just kind of hilarious that Shaun doesn't notice. And then he, never hesitates or anything. And it's even so ridiculous to the point that he actually hands one of the zombies change, the homeless dude.
I thought he said no.
Or
I
no,
don't
he
have
said
change.
no. He said no, yeah. He did
And then
say
he
no.
said, I didn't even have enough papers or have enough for this stuff or something
For
like
the
that.
fucking shop, is what he said, yeah. Yeah. The day before, he hands him change, and the guy drops it on the floor, and he's just like, I'm going to keep going. But yeah, the zombie is just like reaching out, trying to get Shaun, not his change. But it's just so ridiculous because he's like literally inches away from him, and he just walks right by him, doesn't even notice that he's not a human.
Yeah.
So Shaun gets back to the apartment, and Ed is looking out the window, and he says, "There's a girl in the garden." And Shaun's like, "The fuck?" And then Ed says, "In the garden, there's a girl." So they go out, and they're not really sure why she's there. She has her back turned to them, and they kind of try to get her attention. It doesn't work, and then Ed throws a little rock at her, and she turns around slowly. And at first they're not going to assume that she's a zombie, so they just think that she's drunk, which I think is a natural thing to think. I would think so.
Probably around that area.
Yeah, she's probably either like really high or really drunk. I don't know what's going on, but yeah, and then immediately we noticed that she is she's like one of the cashiers from like a supermarket at the opening credits, and now she's in Shaun's backyard, and eventually she approaches Shaun and attacks him, and Ed, being the good friend that he is, decides that he needs to go get a camera.
2 seconds.
2 seconds.
2 seconds.
And Shaun's like, "Ed, 2 seconds," and then he comes back with the camera. Takes a picture of Mary on top of on top of Shaun, and then after that, Ed gets her off, and he notices that, her eyes are all foggy and gray, I guess. So he just was like, "What's up with her eyes?" And then Shaun, tries to tell her, "Hey, back off," and she doesn't. She comes at him again, and then he just pushes her, and then she ends up falling down onto I think it's like a tetherball post, like the bottom of like a tetherball post, or like,
Yeah.
I don't really know exactly what it is, but it was basically a metal pole. She falls directly on it through her torso, her stomach, and normally a normal person would probably yell or scream or be in some kind of agony, but she just basically gets right back up. And one of the coolest shots of this movie is when she gets up and you see the hole that the pole created through her stomach, and then you can sort of see like the shock on Ed and Shaun's face as she gets up, and then you see it like through her hole in her stomach towards Shaun and Ed's face. I thought that was a really clever shot. Although it was 2004 and I definitely noticed the CGI.
Yeah.
But that's fine.
It's all they had.
Yeah.
I know, right?
So obviously they're confused, but also scared. So they turn around to go back inside. And then they notice there's another zombie in their yard. And they manage to get inside. It doesn't really show them going back in, but it cuts to them inside, listening to the news now, and the reporters are telling everybody, stay in your homes, don't try to interact or go near the assailants. And Shaun and Ed pretty much do the complete opposite. I think this is when the news reporter says on the TV, um, if you have to deal with them, try to remove the head or destroy the brain. Um,
Yeah.
so they come up with this brilliant idea, and they grab kitchen accessories and kitchenware and like a toaster and like a paper towel holder and shit, like all the randomest stuff, and they just start throwing it.
Laundry basket.
Yeah, they just
Well,
start
that's the
throwing
one
it.
thing that I noticed though is they grabbed all those utensils, right? But they never show them throwing it. It's always like the appliances.
Oh
They didn't
yeah.
show them throwing the utensils.
Mm, yeah.
All those kitchen knives.
I know. I
Well,
was like,
that
come on.
they also like missed 90% of their
I
throws too.
know.
Yeah.
The only one that hit that I remember, I think the toaster hit the
Yeah.
fat one.
Yeah.
Yeah. On the head.
Yeah.
The bad stuff.
And then I believe it was Ed who threw the record, and then it kind of like it splintered off, but like a part kind of stuck in his cheek,
Yeah.
and then they go for the records.
Which is another not so brilliant idea. But they're learning.
No.
They're adapting.
Batman's soundtrack? Throw it.
Throw it.
I was like, no!
Sade, that's Liz's. But yeah, she did dump you.
Remove him. Yeah.
So yeah, they just throw a bunch of records, and then eventually Shaun said, "You know what? Fuck this. I'm going to the shed." And then they finally find some actual weapons that you would use in a zombie apocalypse: a cricket bat and a
Cricket
shovel.
bat.
I mean, I wouldn't choose a cricket bat as my first weapon, but if that's what was there, I would take it.
Well, they don't have baseball, right? Cricket is more common than
Yeah,
baseball there.
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be
It's
my
The
guess.
stupidest weapon choice of all because it's just flat-sided.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There's nothing
but
sharp about
You
it.
can use the side
it's
to
wooden.
kind of.
Yeah, it's wooden and it's a solid object, and I think it'd be more common than a baseball bat
Yeah.
there.
True.
It's okay. The cricket bat doesn't make it that long in the movie.
No.
So yeah, they successfully kill these two in the yard, and then eventually they go back inside. They take a bit of a breather, and then they start to realize, oh shit, wasn't Pete bitten? After it was like right after the news reporter said, if you know anybody who's been bitten, you should isolate them completely. And then they try to call out for Pete, and he doesn't answer. Pete,
Boy, you prick!
he's not in. So they come to the conclusion that he is A, one of them, or B, he's still annoyed. So basically, they're just gonna take Pete's car, but Shaun has to go take a whiz. So he goes upstairs to the bathroom, and he notices a shadow behind the shower curtain, and instead of just running right out, he opens it and sees a zombified Pete, and tries to, I guess he's just in shock at this point because he's trying to talk to Pete, but Pete's obviously a zombie, so he's not going to answer. But he just tells Pete, hey, we're going to take your car. Hope you don't mind. If you're feeling up for it later, we're going to all go to the Winchester, so feel free to join us. And then he leaves. And you can
And
see.
you do see Pete at the Winchester later.
Yeah, that's true.
So he-
Oh, and he's naked. Like the
And
entire
naked, yeah.
entire time he's a zombie, he's naked. Because
Well, he was in
he
the shower.
turned. Yeah, he must have turned when he was about to start to shower.
Or he's just a nudist.
Yeah. And then I thought it was kind of cool that the hand where he got bit was a lot more. It looked a lot more infected. Like the bandage was really red, and like the blood was coming through and stuff. Like when he pushes open the shower curtain, you could see like all the, I don't know, the stuff that would probably happen if you got bit by a zombie. Like his hand was just basically like purple and red. So I thought that was another cool little attention to detail. So at that point, Shaun and Ed, they actually came up with a plan prior to this, and I kind of wanted to go over these 3 plans, because eventually
yeah.
they end up going to the Winchester, and the other 2 plans were basically the same thing, but they go pick up Barbara, Sean's mom, and they were going to kill Philip, but Shaun, didn't. But anyway, so they pick up Barbara, they pick up Liz, and they go back to Shaun's place. And then I think the first plan that they came up with was actually go back to Liz's place, and have a cup of tea and wait for all this to blow over.
Wink.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was 3 plans that they came up with. It was get the group together and go to Liz's place, get the group together and go to Shaun's, or get the group together and go to the Winchester. And what I want to know from you guys is, do you think that the Winchester was the best place to go
Yes.
based off those 3 options?
I
I
think it
say
depends
yes.
on the direction or like the distance, I guess, for me.
Yeah, I mean, we don't know the
If they were-
distance.
Yeah, I mean, if like they were all together, then I would be like, yeah, the Winchester has, like you said, the door,
Yeah,
but
it
it's
has
ground level.
right.
Yeah, it's ground level, which Liz's was at
Uh,
least the 2nd floor,
Mhm.
Yeah,
and you had to be buzzed to get in.
yeah. So the barricade is a little bit better, but they broke through the window.
At the Winchester.
At the Winchester.
Oh, I thought they broke through her window.
No, Shaun
Shaun
ended up
climbed.
climbing up to get to the.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think Liz's may have been the better.
I think so too. I think because at that point they had everybody there. They had Philip
Besides
and
Barbara.
Barbara
Oh wait, yeah, you're right. They
and
were in the
Ed,
car.
because they were in the
Yeah.
car. But if they just
Yeah.
instead just were like, okay, come on, we're going to Liz's apartment, then it would have been there. They would have been there. That would have been it. They wouldn't have had to transport Liz and her friends anywhere.
Right, but the only thing about an apartment complex is there's a lot of other people there.
Yeah.
So granted, it could be anyone in that apartment building
hmm
got infected. They could just.
True, but you just locked the door. Like the zombies didn't seem that strong at all.
Well, at
Yeah,
Sean's
not
place,
really.
they broke the windows.
Yeah,
And then
but
at
they
the
were
Winchester.
definitely
Winchester.
aware
Yeah.
that Shaun and Ed were inside, and it was
Yeah,
like
you just
not a very
barricade
strong
the
window.
door.
Yeah, and
I'm
then
pretty
at the
sure in every zombie thing I've ever seen, apartments is never a good option.
That's my guess. My guess would be too many people,
yeah
possibly infected people.
yeah. Plus, you would have to figure out what to do with Philip because he was already infected.
Right.
Yeah.
So the Winchester at least was a bar, which you knew had water and food because they served
And beer.
food. Well, beer, yeah, too. But like,
Yeah.
there would be at least supplies. Definitely more than
Yeah.
you would have at your own place.
Yeah.
And they had that like bunker in the bottom of it.
But they didn't
So-
know about that, did they?
Well, I want to get to that when we get there, but
Oh, okay.
but yeah, I think it's hard. I would go with either Liz's apartment or the Winchester, just because I think Liz's apartment was more convenient, but the Winchester was a lot more secure. If they
Yeah.
did it,
I
they
would
did it right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say in terms of character, the Winchester was not the best choice because he was going to the Winchester every day, and that was like his life.
Yeah.
So if we were looking at this in terms of character, Liz's place would have been the best place to go because it's him taking responsibility for his
Mhm.
life and, going to his girlfriend's place and not staying in his own place or staying at the Winchester, which are like familiar areas to him
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
areas that are resistant to change in his life.
Yeah,
But
but
So-
Ed
in
needed
this
somewhere to
case,
smoke.
It's because he was familiar with the Winchester that they knew that it could be bolstered up. It could be barricaded and defended and locked and whatever.
Yeah.
And supplies!
Right. I'm saying in terms of character development, the Winchester is a step backward rather than a step forward.
Right.
But
Yeah.
for Liz, it's showing that this could be a good place.
This movie isn't about Liz, Trevor.
No, it's about both of them.
Not Liz of the Dead.
But Shaun said this isn't about you and me. It's about survival.
That is true. Homeboy did say that.
But it was
That's
about
every
Liz.
movie. Every zombie movie is about survival.
Yeah.
Which is actually one of my criticisms, but we'll get there.
So going back to after they, come up with their final plan to go to the Winchester, and they take Pete's car. They immediately get into trouble because Ed hits the car alarm and draws all the walkers. It's not the Walking Dead.
Wow, you gotta sit there, Walking Dead.
Zombies. Ed draws all the zombies closer to them, and then they quickly get out of there. And immediately, I was super pissed off at Ed for pretty much the rest of the movie because it was just one mistake after another for him. The first
I don't
being,
know if it was a mistake.
well, we'll get into it, but I just think his erratic driving was not
Sloppiness.
something that should have been.
He was aiming for the zombies.
Yeah, exactly. He was, and he was speeding, and he was just not thinking clearly at all.
No.
So they go to Barbara's house.
They're coming from you, Barbara.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Also, I like that little nod to Night of the Living Dead. Yeah, because the main character in that is Barbara, and Ed says, "We're coming to get you, Barbara." So I like that. But anyway, so they get to Barbara's place, and Shaun has the intention of killing Philip because he knows he's infected, but basically doesn't do it because he, pussies out, and he just can't do it.
Well, he sees that he's still alive.
Yeah, and I guess that was why, because in the vision where they're talking about the plan, every time Philip was already a zombie.
Yeah.
But one thing that I also wanted to point out that was attention to detail. I don't know if you guys catched it in the film, but while Shaun and his mom are talking in the kitchen, and she's making her sandwiches and the tea and all that, which, by the way, I thought was a really compelling sequence of dialogue between the two of them. I really believed that was Shaun's mom. Like I don't know. It seemed real to me. I liked her and Shaun's relationship because they basically just, it seems like Shaun and Philip never got along, and she's been trying to convince him for years that this is your father whether you like it or not. I love him, and and Shaun's just trying to tell her that, look, you don't know what's going on. Like he's not gonna be your husband for that much longer, and this and that. But while they're talking, and it's really quiet, and I don't know if you guys caught it, but if you listen closely to when they're talking about Philip in the kitchen, you can hear in the background outside, you can hear Ed crashing the car.
Oh.
I don't think I heard that.
Yeah, it's very quiet, but it's a sequence that goes on for a couple of seconds. You hear him screeching the tires, and like you hear the impact that he has when he hits the pole. And I just thought that was such a nice little attention to detail again. And it's just really funny that they had that in there. Because, I mean, he did crash the car. You go outside and he's crashed the car so he can drive the Jaguar.
Yeah.
Which is so stupid. But yeah, I just thought it was interesting that they had that. So yeah. So anyway, they end up taking Philip and Barbara out of their house. And this is where we get our first real, like, I don't know, I guess close encounter. Or I mean, it's really an encounter. It's not just close. It actually happens when Philip gets bit again. I kind of felt bad because he was already bitten. So he gets bit in the neck, and it's a really brutal. It's a really big chunk of meat that gets
Yeah.
he just gets his neck just chopped right off by that zombie.
Yeah.
And then he gets like a few tissues just to cover it up, but it's just like not enough, obviously. um, so basically, what happens is Ed crashes the car on purpose. He never says it, but it's obviously on purpose. Um, and just so he can drive the Jaguar, which is Philip's car. And this is where I start to notice on my last viewing when we watched it that I feel like Ed is sort of the unintentional like antagonist of the movie. And I don't know if antagonist would be the right word, but he is constantly causing conflict in the plan to survive.
Yeah.
And this is one of the first instances, and it comes up later a couple more times. So basically, the four of them, they get into the Jaguar. Philip is now bleeding a lot. They go to Liz's apartment, and Shaun climbs up the window, and he convinces them that we need to go to the Winchester because it's safe. And I mean, there's not a lot of important stuff that happens right here. It's just them talking about how Shaun thinks they should go to the Winchester because it's safe. That's basically what happens. And then
Well,
eventually,
they bash on David,
yeah,
pretty much having feelings for Liz, and then he's in complete denial.
yeah. And so basically, Shaun convinces all of them that they need to grab some weapons and come with him. So they do. Shaun kind of does all the work getting back to the car or back to the street. He kills all the zombies and kind of shows Liz and David and Diane kind of how to do it, which I thought was kind of interesting because in that scene, it was like the only time where the three of them didn't really do anything. Because later on, they all kind of defend themselves in one way or another
Not
at certain
David.
points. Yeah,
No.
David's kind of a little
David sucks.
bitch.
He's a
There's
little
always
bitch.
one that's useless in the party.
Yeah, of course, of
Yeah.
course. So
My team will
basically,
carry me.
they come up they come up to the street and they're like, oh, where's the car? And then Ed pulls up, and I'm not going to say that line, but they get into the car and it's super crowded in the car, and Ed is still being very erratic driving around, and Shaun is constantly trying to tell him, like, you know, you need to slow down, you need to not drive so quick or so fast, and Ed's not listening to him. And this is when Philip has his last sort of words for Shaun, and he tells Shaun, you know, that he always wanted to be there for him, and I'm really paraphrasing here, but basically he tells Shaun that he was always a good kid and he always loved him, and he always just felt like Shaun needed motivation. And I think this is really a turning point for Shaun because Hannah mentioned it earlier, I think the best, when she was talking about how Pete and Ed are sort of like the two sides of Shaun. And the conversation with Philip to Shaun right before he dies, he basically just tells him, like, you just need motivation. You've always been a good kid, and that's a good boy. And then he dies. So I mean, that's basically the main sort of message that Shaun needs, is that he just needs motivation to succeed, and he needs someone, like a goal, a common goal. And I think Shaun's goal in this movie is to just make sure that the ones he cares about, you know, live through this. And yeah, so he proceeds to try and tell Ed that he needs to pull over, and Ed doesn't listen. And instead of like just calmly pulling over the car, he does like a donut and swerves the car around. And then Ed's just like, hey, chill out, man. And Shaun like basically hits his seat, and he's just like, stop telling me to chill out. And then he tells his mom that her husband's dead, and then she's like, "Gone where? He's gone." And then she's like, "No, he's not." And then he turns to
He's
him
right there.
again, and he's a zombie. And then they kind of panic and they just get out of the car, and they lock Philip inside.
Well,
Um,
I was gonna say Nick Frost. Ed and Liz make it out, but it's child locked because safety first.
yeah,
So Liz has to go around and get him out of the car.
Yeah,
And
because
she's like,
Ed's just
Ed,
staring at him.
yeah,
he was
he's
just standing
useless.
there.
He was literally watching it happen, like not even
Yeah.
like pretending to not know. He just was watching it.
Yeah.
So yeah, they get everybody out and then lock Philip inside the car. And then Barbara's like really confused, and I don't think she really fully understood the concept of what was happening.
No.
Basically the whole movie, maybe until she got bit. That's when she was like, "Oh fuck, this is real." But yeah, she didn't even understand hardly like what was going on with Philip, and Shaun had to kind of explain it to her. So yeah, from there they make their way through the neighborhood, kind of like the back streets, to try and get to the Winchester. And then the next important scene that happens is when Barbara is kind of left behind.
Well, she leaves herself behind.
Yeah, she's saying, I think Bill and Derek live here. She's like in someone's backyard, and she was trying to tell Shaun, but Shaun didn't hear her. So they hop over the fence, and then I think Shaun was just like, "Oh, is everyone here?" And then I think it was Diane. She's like, "Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5." And they just completely forgot about Barbara.
There's 6 of us.
and then Shaun jumps the fence, which was such a ridiculous stunt when he jumps over that little tiny ass trampoline and perfectly lands. Like he's
His
not an
mom was in
athlete.
danger.
Yeah, but obviously it's the adrenaline. But I just feel like it was one of those like over the top, like silly action moments. And I think it was for maybe not comic relief, but just like this, like, oh, let's just have Shaun do this like ridiculous backflip like he's some kind of athlete. So they basically get to Barbara's rescue, and then Shaun is attacked by the zombie that bit Barbara. Of course, Barbara doesn't reveal to anybody, including the audience, that she was bit. But obviously something's a little fishy about the whole thing, because
Yeah,
she's
'cause
acting
she keeps
differently.
holding her hand.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Shaun goes through this sequence of trying to kill the zombie, and he doesn't have a weapon anymore because he left it in the car. So I think the first thing that happens is Liz and Diane, they grab a few items in that backyard and start hitting the zombie, and then one of them throws a tetherball pole to Shaun, and it has the little ball on the end of it, and it's like this little tiny like tennis ball. If even that, I don't even think it was a tennis ball. It was like a really really soft ball, and he grabs the pole, and he's like, yes, and then he swings the ball on the string and hits the zombie with the ball, which is so dumb.
And then
'Cause
he
they-
makes like that little squeaky noise too.
Yeah. And then they like signal to him, and they're like making like this jabbing motion.
Yeah.
Like, take the pole and jab him with it. So he turns it around and jabs him through the tree, which I thought was also a little
That
impossible.
was over the top. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's no way that pole would go through
Yeah,
that
it would have to be a
tree.
really sharp bottom on that
Yeah.
pole.
Jeez.
Yeah. But
Comedic effect.
yeah.
It's fine.
And then after that, they check to see if the coast is clear, because the Winchester is right over the fence of that backyard. So Shaun gets on this little slide, this little like kid slide, and he checks, and we don't see what he sees yet, but he comes back down, and he says, or they're like, "Is the coast clear?" And he's like, "Nope." How many
His
are there?
face changed too.
Lots. And then it pans up to above the fence, and you see the Winchester right there, and there's probably like 50 zombies out there, just right in front of the Winchester, just walking on the street. Um, and then they kind of go into this moment of, I guess, relapse where they're just kind of complaining about, well, it's really mostly David is complaining about how Shaun, Captain Wow, got all of us here, and it's his fault that we're all stuck here now. Um, and Ed's kind of defending Shaun, and Liz is, or not Liz, Diane is kind of defending Shaun too. And this is a really great moment for Diane because she was really more of one of the side characters. But she has her moment to shine where David says, or someone says, I don't remember who it was. It might have been Liz. One of them says, like, well, David, we're not going to get anywhere by moaning. And then, or maybe it was Diane that said that. I don't know, whatever. But they look at Diane, and Diane's like, oh. And then she comes up with this plan where they go and look at the zombie, and they sort of study it in a way. And they go through everyone kind of trying to imitate a zombie because they think this will get them to the Winchester. I guess it's like a Trojan horse kind of thing.
Blending in.
Yeah. And I like how they transitioned from doing it in the backyard, like practicing it, and then they all take like a deep breath, and then suddenly they're out on the street doing it. I thought that was a cool transition where they just take a deep breath, all of them at the same time, and then they're out on the street doing it.
Yeah.
I thought Liz's performance was pretty good as a zombie. David was shit. Barbara,
Yeah.
He didn't even try.
yeah,
Barbara
he was
was,
like,
"Ooh."
yeah, she was like wooing the whole time.
Away.
She was a ghost.
She was miles away. Yeah. And then David like didn't even try. He's just like,
It's probably like
then-
him in bed though.
Yeah, probably.
Oh my god, of course. But I mean, this also shows off how Ed was is still dicking around, like not taking this seriously.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Like him and Shaun, like they're just kind of joking about it. It's like, oh, well, let me see yours then. And then Shaun actually does a pretty decent zombie
Yeah.
impression.
Yeah.
Who made you king of the fucking zombies? I love Ed's though because he looks like I don't even know how to describe it, but he's just like waving his hands around, like prancing like a zombie.
Dancing zombie queen.
Yeah. So they basically navigate through the zombies as zombies, fake zombies, and they make it to the front door. And this is another instance where I feel like Ed really screws it up for everybody because he gets a phone call right in the middle of this.
Yeah.
And he actually, instead of just like ignoring it or turning it off, damn it, I have hiccups. Instead of ignoring it or turning it off, he answers it. And I don't know if you guys heard any of the conversation, but it's basically someone trying to buy weed off him.
Yeah.
I think they call it Henry. And I'm pretty sure it's weed. I'm just assuming that's what it is.
Well,
Yeah,
because
'cause
he kind of says it in the beginning of the movie, like,
Yeah.
Yeah, Pete
He's
tells Shaun that like or Shaun tells Pete that he sells a bit of weed every now and then, stuff like that. But yeah, and then obviously this pisses off everybody, and Shaun's the most pissed off, and this is one of those I guess, yeah, because you sort of like Shaun snaps at Ed.
Yeah.
And he snaps hard, and he's like pissed off. He's livid with Ed, telling him exactly what everyone else has been telling him the entire movie, saying like, I spent my whole life sticking up for you, and all you ever do is fuck it up. And it was a really big moment in the movie for their relationship, because Ed obviously becomes aware of it, but he doesn't change his ways really. I mean, he kind of does in the Winchester, but we'll get to that. But yeah, I mean, basically it's just Shaun basically yelling at Ed the whole time. And then Liz is like, Shaun, and you like tapping him on the shoulder, and he looks back, and all the zombies are just standing there watching them.
Yeah.
Like they're not even like trying to move; they're just watching, waiting.
They're intrigued by it.
Yeah, I thought that was one of those more over the top comedy moments because it's like in a real zombie moment, they wouldn't just be watching; they'd be attacking them.
I think it's also a clever play, just because I guess on the topic of Ed being the antagonist, like you were saying earlier, I would also agree that he's not an antagonist, like by general definition. I'd say the better like term for it is that he's a reflection of all the like worst parts of Shaun.
Mm-hmm.
And that he really, especially in the moments during the second act where he's messing things up constantly, it's all, what I noticed was that it's all very childish.
Yeah.
Like everything that he's doing, crashing the car, doing donuts, just everything he was doing was very like almost playing a video game, or almost like very childish in nature.
Top left.
And so, yeah, it kind of is interesting in that scene where they are yelling at each other, especially with the world being a reflection of Shaun's need to change.
Mm-hmm.
I like that the world stops when he's confronting Ed, because he's confronting all the things he needs to change about himself. In growing up and taking responsibility for his life and becoming, an adult.
Yeah.
He's literally yelling at Ed, who is the representation of like all the childish things about his life that he's been so resistant to changing for so long. And the world around him reflects that. And in that moment, like you said, all the zombies stop and look at him, and even though it's based in like a comedic effect type of way, it's literally like the world stops when he's making the change.
Yeah,
like this is I believe like 100% that moment is the moment where he's like, I'm accepting the change and I'm changing now.
Gotcha.
And the world stops for it. I thought that was very clever.
Well said.
That's interesting. Yeah, it's like
Ditto.
the world is trying to make Shaun. It's like trying to give Shaun a way to progress to the point where it's literally going to stop for him to make that change.
Yeah,
that's interesting. Huh. So anyway, no, Hannah, that's really good. I like that a lot.
That's why I said ditto.
It's Gigi's thing now. She says ditto now.
Dilio.
Oakley dokley. Anyway, so yeah, basically what happens after that is David panics because he's a panicker.
Yep.
And he breaks the window, which is exactly what Shaun told him not to do. But he does it anyway.
Shaun doesn't want me to do it.
Yeah, exactly. So he breaks the window, everyone gets in, and Shaun comes up with this like last minute plan to lead the zombies away from the rest of the group. And it works. They get inside, and this basically shows, this segues into the third act, which is the final act, and it's just the Winchester. Because this is the last third of the movie, and this is where the rest of the movie basically takes place, besides the ending, the very last 2 minutes. But so basically...
before you...
Yeah.
Oh, I was going to say, before you get into that, I just wanted to also say that, and it mostly happens during the second act, I thought it was kind of cool the way that the build up to the zombies was sort of revealed. It's a very, very slow build up in comparison to a lot of other zombie things that we've seen over the years. Like Walking Dead, for example, you see the zombie like episode 1.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, this is a zombie thing.
Yeah.
But this, I think, was very interesting in the way that it slowly built up to the zombies. Even though it was technically showing you them from the beginning, because all the people were in fact zombies as well as Shaun was at the beginning. Like every person that they showed, like when he's like sitting on a bus or whatever, there's people sitting behind him like yawning. There's people sitting in front of him that are like super pale. And like us as the viewers, I think it was interesting that we are put in this state of the zombie state that Shaun's in from the beginning, but we notice the zombies before he does because he's so in this like zombified state
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
trance, yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, it takes him even longer than it takes us as viewers because we're not at that state. We're put into like a point of view where we're meant to understand his state, but we still, have our own individual states of mind outside of it, which is why we notice the zombies that are like behind him or, in
Around
different
him.
shots.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
around him before he even does. And I thought that was very interesting for a build-up of like a zombie movie.
Yeah, I always liked when they kind of show normal life in a zombie movie and then sort of like the downfall. Like yeah, like you said in Walking Dead, they don't do that. It's just they show like flashbacks of what life was every now and then. Like the first season, it's just to show character development, but like in the first episode, it's already happened and it's months
Exactly.
into it. And other zombie movies like 28 Days Later, which is the same sort of opening as The Walking Dead. I think The Walking Dead kind of copied 28 Days Later. I don't know if you guys have ever seen that movie, but
Nope.
I am. Does it start with monkeys like in cages?
yes. And then
Yep.
it switches to the main character who's in a coma and he wakes up from a
Yeah.
coma and it's literally the same as The Walking Dead. Except I
Yeah.
think he was in a coma because of a car crash or something like that. But he wakes up to London, the streets of London being empty.
I watched that movie on accident.
The slow build up I thought was also very kind of clever in the way that it's, our general perception of zombies is like zombies are dangerous, but they're very slow. And the slow build up to the zombies like kind of reflected that.
Yeah.
I was like, oh yeah. Now I get why we're slowly being introduced to zombies is that like, zombies are slow.
Yeah.
Duh.
Yeah.
Okay, so yeah, going into Act 3, the Winchester, things seem to quiet down after Shaun kind of leads the zombies away from the pub. The remaining group sort of questions what their next move should be. Everyone except for David is sort of in agreement that they should just wait for Shaun to come back because he's the quote-unquote leader of the group. But David thinks that Shaun is incapable of leading the group, and he thinks that someone else should take responsibility, someone like himself. But
Well,
everyone,
I want to chime in here. Again, he's avoiding what everyone else sees is very obvious. Like, he says, like, well, if no one else wanted to step up, then maybe I should. Like, he's very unwillingly the leader,
yeah, yeah,
but he's trying to avoid that. Like, he's trying to avoid letting Liz know about his feelings for her.
right. And so they kind of just sit in the dark and don't do much. They sort of argue about basically, it's just David going off on a little tangent. And eventually he starts throwing out food to everybody, saying like, oh, this was Shaun's grand master plan. We're just going to sit around and eat niblets, I think he calls it. And then he's just throwing like all these little packets of peanuts or whatever out at everybody. And then the third one he throws, Shaun actually catches it because he's there. He just kind of emerges and he catches it. And suddenly there's like this sense of relief from everybody in the group. Shaun comes back and he's like this man with a plan because he's like asking all these questions, like important questions, like, oh, what's the deal with the power? What's the deal with this and that? And asking if they've seen the owners or anything. And these are questions that nobody else is asking. Not that they're all super dire, important conversation points to have, but I think it's good to know, and it's kind of showing that Shaun is starting to change and starting to become more responsible and thinking about other people and what's in the best interest for everybody. So basically, they sit in the dark and eat peanuts for a little while. And then I think the next thing that happens is the power comes back on
The outside lights come
yeah,
on.
the street lights, and so they start playing around with the power, and trying to remember how we get to the next part when the bartender comes in.
Sean was flipping the fuses, and then
Oh, he
he
notices.
tries the door to, I think it goes upstairs, I want to say, but
Yeah.
it's locked for him.
Yeah, like the door that says private on it.
Yeah,
Yeah, and then he flips the light switches to the back door, and he sees all the zombies that followed him.
yeah,
And that's when the next thing happens, where he's kind of just in shock, or he's
yeah,
worried, I guess.
yeah. He didn't give the zombies the slip
Yeah,
like
like
he
he
thought.
thought. So he tells Liz this, and she's just like, okay, well, I guess we'll just have to be extra quiet. And then this is when Ed asks for a quarter, and he starts the ping pong machine, which is super loud. And this is, I think, not only was it Ed starting the pinball machine, but Shaun and Liz both scream like at the top of their lungs, Ed,
Yeah.
no! And I think that
Yeah.
escalated even more. So I don't think it's just Ed's fault. I don't think they had to scream, but they did for dramatic effect. Um, and so basically, at this point, this is when all the zombies around the street, they come back to the Winchester, and they're up against the windows and doors, and you can see them. You can see like the shadows of the zombies right at the windows. Um, and then that's when everyone's kind of like, okay, I guess this is what we have to deal with now. We just have to be quiet. So they all start like putting their shoulders on each other, and they go down the line, and then it gets to David, and then there's John, the owner of the Winchester, as a zombie. And he puts his shoulder on David, and he's a zombie. And then as soon as that happens, the jukebox starts up, and "Don't Stop Me Now" by Queen starts playing.
Yeah.
Which is like, that's like one of my favorite scenes in the movie. It's really memorable for me, and every time I hear that song, I think of this scene. Because this is sort of the last, what I think is like the last comedic moment of the movie before the shit really hits the fan. Because in this scene, it's still like kind of lighthearted, and you know, you think that everyone's okay for now, if you haven't seen the movie. So basically, they take the pool cues from the pool table, and as the intro for the Queen song is going, Sean's just like, all right, John, how about some pool? And then it's Shaun, Liz, and Ed, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So the three of them, they're hitting John with the pool cues, like in sync with the music. So it's like they're doing it on the beat.
Yeah.
And they're doing it like simultaneously, and it was just a really funny moment. And then even better is when Liz grabs the fire extinguisher, and the part in the song where Freddie Mercury's like, I'm gonna blow, or whatever he says, explode.
Explode.
And then when he says explode, Liz starts the fire extinguisher all over his face. And I just thought it was just a really clever use of the song, I guess. And then after that, Diane, or Shaun and John are kind of like, you know, going at it or whatever. And then Diane starts throwing darts to try and hit John, and he hits him in the arm, and then she throws it again. Or no, I think she misses, and Sean's like, no, and then she hits him in the arm, and then Sean's like, yes, in the head, and then Diane throws it a third one, and it hits Sean in the head. And I thought that was really funny too. And then after that, Ed throws the rifle at Shaun, and then Shaun like looks at it like it's useless, and then he's just like, all right, fine. So then he hits John with the rifle, and then pushes John into the jukebox, which kills the jukebox and John.
Yeah.
And then Ed's just like, why don't you just shoot him, mate? And then Sean's like, for the last time, it's not. And then it goes off.
There is something right after that, and then he says, okay, but dogs can look up, and that's something I wanted to bring up because I don't really understand that part, because that's not the first time. I forgot the guy, but there's some guy that they reference who says dogs can't look up.
Big Al.
Big Al, and that's the third time, and I'm just wondering, like, is that like a reference to something? Is that just maybe an extra bit that the viewer isn't supposed to understand, or is that just something British? Like, what's up with that?
I don't know, maybe it's some conversation that like some of them had offset, or like just in their lifetime as friends or something, and then they like threw it in the movie. I don't know. But dogs can look up.
Yeah.
Obviously. But yeah, after that, they sort of gear up for like this fight because they know that the zombies are probably going to get into the bar eventually. So they got to kind of barricade everything, and Shaun starts shooting some of the zombies that are coming in, and he gets one of them after a bunch of terrible shots.
Yeah.
And people were kind of confusing him because they were saying like they were doing like the clock thing where it's like, oh, 12 o'clock or 3 o'clock, but like Diane and David were being totally useless.
Well, David says
Somebody say
11:45.
Yeah,
Oh.
11:45, and Diane just says, over there.
Over there. It's like, we need to be specific.
Yeah, and then Ed's the only one that is actually helpful in that situation.
I think he says top left or something
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
that.
He says top left. He tells Shaun to reload, which is a nice callback to when Ed was playing video games in the apartment, and Shaun said the exact same thing to him.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those. Player 2 has left the game. Yeah, this is sort of right before the shit hits the fan, because after this, Shaun basically tells Liz, hey, get my mom out of the way. So Liz does so, and then Barbara reveals to Liz that she's been bitten, and it's a really deep bite. I don't know what was going on there. It just looked like a hole in her arm, and it was
Yeah.
really gross. Like, it didn't look like a bite mark. It just looked like there was a hole in her arm. But she reveals to Liz first that she's been bitten, and that she wants Liz to have her, I think it was her necklace.
Yeah.
And it was like something that was just really important to her, and I think it's kind of symbolic because that's what parents do. They sort of pass on things to their children or their wives, their husbands' wives, or I'm sorry, their sons' wives or daughters' husbands, or whatever the case may be. Something that's like a family heirloom. And it's a really touching moment. And then Shaun obviously notices that something's going on, so he goes over, and this is where Shaun is kind of, he's really lost at this point, because he realizes that his mom's gonna die, that she's been bitten, but he doesn't want to accept it. And this is one of those parts where you really feel for Shaun, but you also have to understand the situation and know that his mom is not going to live, and know that Shaun, despite it being a very sad moment, is kind of being a hypocrite, as David said.
Yeah.
Because he's basically telling the group, like, no, she's my mom. She's not going to turn, like trying to put her on this pedestal like she's special, and she's not. I mean, she's still gonna turn, no matter who she is. And so I
Another
think,
part of growing up too,
yeah,
is
exactly.
losing your parents. So.
I think it's another sort of character development kind of thing. So basically, Barbara says her last kind of words. She grabbed those flowers from outside, and she showed Shaun the flowers, or she might have showed Liz. I can't remember, but I thought it was sweet that she grabbed the flowers and somehow knew that they were for her. And
He
then
did put a card on it, and I imagine he would have signed it his name.
maybe, yeah. I mean, we never really see it.
No.
But
Super mum.
but basically, she dies, and it's a very sad moment. And then David kind of comes in and does what you're supposed to do, but does it in a really asshole kind of way.
All right, come on, let's shoot it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And like he's right, but he's not being very nice about it.
Cinder it.
Yeah. And they get into this argument about how, David's basically, been in love with Liz this entire time, and he's like, oh, he just wants to shoot my mom because he doesn't like me, and he's always had it out for me, and he's been in love with Liz. And then Diane chimes in and says the same sort of thing, like, yeah, I know you only got close to me because we all knew you liked Liz. And David's
Like,
kind
I'm
of
okay with that.
yeah, he's put on the spot. So basically they have this argument, and then afterward, David hands the gun over to Shaun. Well, I mean, it's really Liz and Shaun. They have a little talk, and Liz is trying to tell him in a more polite way, like, you have to do this, or this, she has to be shot. She's gonna turn. And she just tells him, like, I know you don't want to hear this. And then that's when she stands up as a zombie. And then David pussies out again and hands him the gun. And then Shaun shoots his mom. And then David says what you don't want to say to somebody who just shot their mom. He's like, oh, I think we can all agree you did the right thing there. And then Shaun, he drops the gun prior to David saying that, just because he's in shock and doesn't, he's disgusted with what he just did, basically. And then, so the gun's on the ground. David says that to Shaun, and then Shaun turns around and clocks him in the face. And then David grabs the gun and cocks it and shoots it, but it wasn't loaded. It was the last shot.
David!
Yeah. And then David's like, right, I'm getting out of here. And then this is where all hell breaks loose, because David, he unlocks the door. I think it was the front door. And he unlocks it, and then Diane talks him out of leaving. And so he was genuinely about to, come back to the group and not leave. And he steps away from the door towards a window, and you can see in the background that there's a bunch of zombies right there on the other side of the window. And Diane is, he apologizes to Diane, and Diane's like, I don't think you should be apologizing to me. And then he says, Shaun, and then before he can say he's sorry, the window breaks, and they grab David and just rip him apart.
Yeah.
One of the most brutal, like, deaths I've ever seen in a zombie film. Like, it was gross, and his stomach looked like I don't even know, like, it was really squishy. Like, I don't know how easy it is to rip into somebody's stomach.
Because he's full of
It's
shit.
not that easy.
Yeah, but there were a lot of them, and I mean, zombies, I don't know, they don't have feelings, so I'm sure they don't physically care about how hard they're gonna try and dig into that person's stomach, because they just need their meal. So they rip his stomach apart, and then somehow his legs and his head and arms, all of his limbs come off. I thought that was a little over the top, but I think if there's enough force on a person, you could probably rip their limbs off. I don't know if it would be that clean though. Like, it just seemed like they just kind of popped off. So
Like he was made of Legos or something.
yeah. And so this is where this is sort of the downfall of the group, because after this, Diane, who's what I'm gonna assume is in shock, because she literally finishes opening up the front door and leaves to go find David, who's obviously dead.
Yeah.
And it's funny because that whole sequence when it's just Shaun, Liz, and Ed in the Winchester now, you can still hear Diane in the background outside yelling David. She's like, David! Like, she's doing it like the entire time until they get behind the bar. It's so ridiculous. So in the film, we never really know Diane's fate. Um, but if you watch the bonus features in the film, there's a little segment in the special features where they talk about what happens to Diane. Um, and basically, what happens, to paraphrase it, she goes outside and she's searching for David, but she soon realizes that it was a big mistake because she obviously knows that he's dead. So instead, she fights off a few zombies with the leg that she has, David's leg. She uses it as a weapon, and then she crawls up into a tree and stays up there. And she's up there for weeks. I don't know why she stayed so long, because the army came like that same night to save everybody or to kill the zombies. So I don't know what she was doing in that tree for so long, but like in the special features, this is literally what happens. She takes the pant leg off of David's leg and she starts eating it to survive.
Oh,
And she eats the whole thing according to the special features. And then eventually she gets down once there's nobody, once the whole town is vacant, and she decides to go up to her parents' house, and that's it.
Wow.
Yeah. So I'm
poor
happy that
Diane.
yeah, I'm happy that Diane didn't die, because she was a cool character. I liked her. Basically, what happens? The zombies have obviously taken over the pub. They're all coming in. And it's a very quick sequence, but basically what's going on is Shaun has the gun, Liz has a bar stool, and she's trying to keep the zombies back, and Ed is making Molotov cocktails in the background, and he's about to light one and throw it when the back door gets crashed, or it gets broken open, and there is the zombie Pete that comes in, and he's still taking everything super, you know, not serious. And he yells out to Shaun. He's like, "Hey, Shaun, look who it is!" And Shaun looks, and he's just like, "Oh, fuck a doodle do," because that's something that they say. And you know, it's one of those scenes that just really makes me just like, you know, it's disappointment because it's so easy to not get eaten right there. But Ed is just, I don't know, he's just too stupid. And so he grabs Pete from behind to try and keep him still, just so he doesn't get eaten by Pete. But there's like, you know, dozens of more zombies right behind him, and the other one, which is the bartender's wife, comes up and bites him in the neck. And then Ed lets up on Pete just enough so that Pete starts biting Ed's arm, and then Ed's basically fucked at this point. And then there was a cool little line of dialogue where Shaun yells, you know, he's yelling at Ed, saying like, "Ed, no!" And then he yells at Pete, and he's like, "Pete!" And then Pete, like, it's like he heard him or something, even though he's a zombie. But he gets up, and then Shaun's just like, "I said, leave him alone!" And then he shoots him right between the eye. I thought that was a really nice little piece of dialogue, because he said that to Pete before, talking about Ed, earlier in the movie when Pete is still alive, and he's basically just bashing Ed the whole time, and Shaun's just like, "Oh, leave him alone." I thought that was kind of a cool little throwback to the earlier dialogue, and they do a lot of that in the movie. But basically, from there, they run to the back of the bar, or behind the bar, I guess, and they're all surrounded. It's just Liz and Shaun, and then Ed eventually joins them. And then Ed points out that there's a cellar underneath the bar, and this is what really kind of like, not confused me, but was sort of an interesting point, because I don't know if Ed knew that there was a cellar there the whole time, or if he just happened to see it right then and there, because there was a carpet there, right, like covering it. So
Yeah.
so what I'm thinking is Ed knew it was there, but for whatever reason he didn't say anything. And I feel like that would have saved everybody if they just were like, let's just go to the cellar and wait for all this to end. And
Barbara.
yeah, yeah, except for Barbara, she would have been gone. But I think it's just another one of those things where Ed's just messing up because he seemed to know that there was a cellar there and didn't say anything, or didn't bother to know or care about anyone's safety. Assumingly going to be eaten alive or dead by the time the zombies get down there. And then they go up to the street level, and it's a pretty quick sequence. In the background, if you notice, you can still see David's torso on the side of the sidewalk, and there's like a couple zombies eating at it still.
Oh god.
And I think one of his legs or something like that. I didn't notice that before, but I noticed it the last time. But yeah, basically it's a pretty quick sequence because they get to the street, and then 10 seconds later, they get rescued by the army, which is a rare thing in a zombie film. Because usually it's like, oh, we're all gonna die, that's it. But it basically, the apocalypse is over like as soon as it started. And we go to the final scene where Liz is now living with Shaun, and Shaun seems to be, I don't know, he's more of an improved person, and he's more happy this way. But him and Liz are happy, and I think that's what matters. And the movie ends with Shaun going to the shed, and I think Liz was saying like, "Oh," or I don't know what he said, but Shaun was just like, "Oh, I'm going out to the shed," and then she's like, "Go on then," and then he says 2 seconds, and then he goes out to the shed, and there's a zombified Ed playing the PlayStation, and Shaun joins him, and then the movie ends right there with another Queen song, "You're My Best Friend."
Yeah.
Nice little touch to end the movie. So yeah, that is Shaun of the Dead.
I believe I saw it when it came out, and I think it still holds up. It's still one of my favorite zombie movies. Not that I've seen a lot, but I still enjoy this movie every time I see it.
Same. It's definitely one of my favorites. I don't know. I think for me, it's just another film that has a lot of nostalgia attached to it for me. Because the first time I watched it, I had to turn it off because I was in I think third grade when I watched
Oh
it
my
for the first
God.
time, and I watched it with my dad, and I told him to turn it off after like the first zombie that we saw because I was too scared, and he was trying to convince me. He's like, it's not a scary movie, it's a comedy, and I was like, no, I don't want to watch it. And then so I think it was the part where he turned off is when the tuxedo dude with one arm missing comes into their apartment. I think that's when I turned it off. So so yeah, and then um yeah, I mean, it's just one of my favorite films. I think it's just a really, I don't know, I think it's an easy watch, but it also has a lot of um deeper meaning to it. I think there's
And
a lot of,
replayability.
yeah, yeah, exactly. And I think every time I watch it, there's something new that I notice or that I think about. Um, and depending on who has seen it, they can sometimes, point to things that I never noticed before. Like you guys today, like there were some things that I didn't ever think about before. So I think that's just one of those movies where it's like, it's just really cool because it's like you might not get everything on the first watch. Just like The Prestige, the last movie that we watched, where it's just
Yeah.
like, oh man, I gotta watch that movie again.
Mhm.
So, real quick before we end, I want to go over the Rotten Tomato scores. So for this film, I think for me personally, they got it good on this one. The critic score for this film was a 91%,
Nice.
Wow.
and the audience score was a 93%. So straight A's across the board. A minuses, if you will. I think personally, I think that's well deserved. I think it's a really good film, and I think it has the perfect amount of like good special effects and then entertainment. It has a lot of good comedy, a lot of quick, quirky comedy. I think it has a lot of good characters that you can really care about. Um, and I think a lot of the characters are really relatable to people in real life. And I think they're all just believable characters. So, yeah. What do you guys think about the ratings?
Uh, I can go first. I would agree with the score. For the time, it was well done. I think even when did it come out? 2005, you said?
2004.
2004? Okay. So 16 years later, like it still holds up.
Yeah.
Um, and because I think for the most part, this isn't about like special effects or anything. It's about like the story and then seeing Sean um, try to grow up to get this girl he loves and whatever.
Yeah.
So since that's the main focus, it might be timeless. I don't know, but it still holds up. It's a fantastic movie.
I agree with the scores. Um, it is, it, yeah, I don't know. We don't know, I guess, British, I don't want to say culture, but like for the US, obviously we can tell what's aged poorly and what hasn't, at least for us, like I said, in the US. Um, but the UK could be different. So for how long ago it came out, I think it's still pretty good, still pretty decent.
Hmm.
Still, what do you say, relatable in a
Yeah.
sense.
Yeah. Like, I think there's a lot of things in this film that's like, this is probably how I would react.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Where it's like for us in the US, like a 90s film, you're just kind of like, oh God, that's so poor timing, or that's a
Yeah.
bad joke kind of thing, I feel
Didn't
like
age
this one,
well.
yeah, like it, I think it could be, I don't want to say timeless, but I think it could still be relatable in like the future.
Hmm. All right, Hannah, give it to me.
You brought this on yourself. I do not agree with the scores. I think partially it is my fault that I don't, because I came into this movie obviously like 2 days ago. I'd never seen anything about it before. I knew of it, and I knew that it was, from what people had told me, it was a comedy, but that's about all I knew. And so I think that's partially why I do not agree with the scores or don't appreciate it as much. Um, so I have three main criticisms for this movie. The first one, or I guess for my score, I would put it at a 70%.
Okay.
Like, it wasn't terrible. The character of Shaun is really what kept me interested,
Hmm.
and his development over the film. But I think there was definitely elements that were dated, um, and just sort of, I guess for me as a viewer coming into this so late, there's a lot of, I went into it with a lot of zombie fatigue
Hmm.
already. So yeah, my three main criticisms for it. First was tonal discrepancy. I think this movie is meant to be a horror comedy, but I don't think there's a good enough balance between the two genres, uh, that I felt, at quite a few points it was trying to decide whether it wanted to be comedic or be dramatic or horror.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the main examples that really it kind of disserviced itself a little bit in this, and kind of undermined some of its more dramatic moments by kind of undermining it with something comedic. And my main example with that one was, I really appreciated the scene between Shaun and Ed at the end where he's saying goodbye to him, because I took it as he's literally, telling him his younger self, his, more childish nature, his, he's growing up and he's saying, I'm maturing now, basically, like, goodbye, kid self. And I thought that was really
stop
sweet.
laughing.
Yeah. It's really sweet, but the fact that it is undermined by the last scene in which Ed is not dead, he's just undead, and he's sitting in the shed, and they're doing the exact same thing that they were doing at the beginning, which was playing video games together. That just, to me, was very undermining of, the main themes of what this was supposed to be.
Yeah.
And kind of disserviced me as a viewer, just being like, hey, we got all this growth and development, and we're kind of, even though he's a better person now, he's kind of back in the same place he started.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a little upsetting.
I could see that.
So yeah, the tonal discrepancy of being a horror comedy, I think you can do both. I think I'm definitely a fan of films that do both. Like, I think one that does it a little better that comes to mind is Cabin in the Woods. That one's also a horror comedy, but I think there's a better balance in that movie of the two tones than this one does. But
I didn't see this as a horror movie at all, actually.
I think it has
was
the
a comedy
elements.
take on a zombie movie.
Yeah.
That's how I saw it.
well, your opinion's your own.
The reason I asked is because Trevor really likes Cabin in the Woods.
Yeah.
And that's why I was asking him.
Right.
Yeah,
Anyways.
it's labeled on Google as a horror comedy, so I just call it a horror comedy.
I think anything that has like a zombie, some sort of threat like that is automatically labeled with horror because it involves some sort of monster.
Mm-hmm.
Would you consider it had a zombie spoof movie? Maybe not spoof.
I don't
Yeah,
see.
spoof is the wrong
That's where
word.
my problem lies. Is that it's not enough of a comedy to be a spoof movie, and it's not enough of a horror movie. Like, it doesn't have enough horrific elements or dramatic elements to be a drama or a horror either. And like I said, I'm a fan of films that try to do both and try to do more than one tone in each. I just don't think in this movie there was enough of a balance between the two to uphold it.
Mm-hmm.
Good thing they went with two different categories.
My second criticism of this was, like I said, I went into this with a lot of zombie fatigue, and it kind of made a lot of the zombie references and the zombie genre things that were in it very dated for me. Like, I think we all have a general understanding of zombies as, zombies are slow-moving monsters, and you automatically kill them with removing their head or, getting the brain. That's in almost every single zombie thing, because it's like a general rule for zombies. I tend to appreciate the zombie movies or media that kind of takes a spin on that. Something that tries to do something different with it. And like I said, this movie I came into late, so maybe for the time it was doing this, like taking this new spin on it.
Mm-hmm.
But because I've seen so much zombie stuff before this, it comes across to me as very dated and very, typical genre of zombie. Which also brings me to a point where I think zombies are a thing in the world of this movie, because they use the Z word. Like, zombie is a term that they use. My confusion in that came from why, if they know what zombies are and they're avid video game players, and they, the term zombie is a real thing in this world, why did it seem like the two characters were completely incoherent in, like, dealing with them?
Yeah.
Like, there's not a single time in the movie where they're like, oh, do what they do in the movies, like, kill them like this or anything like that, even though it's a real thing in their world. I think there's like a suspension of disbelief when we as viewers watch movies where we're like, you know, where this movie is about zombies, but the characters of this world don't know what a zombie is,
Yeah.
and because they're using this term as a real thing, I thought it was kind of like almost creatively sloppy to not make a reference to outside media. And that might just have been because the movie was made way back in 2004, before we had like movies that were breaking the fourth wall, which, I mean, we had plenty of examples back then that were breaking the fourth wall, but just not as often. So it really was like, it made me, cock my head, like, why if these guys are video game players, and why if these guys are using the term zombie, why don't they know anything on how to deal with zombies?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. The
But
thing that I noticed though was like they understood it right away a lot faster than like your typical zombie movie where they're like in denial half the movie and then someone
right,
intelligent brings it up and like, oh yeah, that makes sense. I'm like, obviously, like the fuck. But like I think it took them less time than like a normal, like I said, zombie movie
yeah, I
to
guess they
get
were
it.
able to believe the news before like a
Right.
scientist had to tell them or
Right,
something.
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And kind of put yourself in their position. Like, if you saw someone stumbling to you, Hannah, like, would your first thought be, oh shit, like they're undead?
Well, this is the thing though. It's not that, they didn't recognize that they were zombies. They did recognize that they were zombies. My problem was that they had no knowledge of how to deal with a zombie,
Or
like,
kill a
and they
zombie.
didn't reference movies or video games or things that existed that would allow them to make the assumption that this is a zombie. Like, if they had not had any prior knowledge, a zombie wouldn't exist in their world,
Yeah.
No,
right?
it's possible they came across the term, like they know what it is, but they just, like, they don't play those games, they don't watch those
Yeah,
movies.
because that's what I was thinking. I was like, they were playing a game before, but was
It
it
was a
like a...
first-person shooter.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
but
a
what were
Call
they
of Duty type
shooting?
thing.
Oh,
Or like Halo, I don't know. It
so
wasn't,
they
I'm
never
just saying.
played
Something like that.
zombies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
Either
But I
mean,
way,
get what
I
you mean,
just think
though.
yeah, okay.
yeah.
No,
I
I get
mean,
My,
it.
they don't say the word zombie until after they've already killed 3 of them.
Yeah.
Um, so I think prior to that, they were still in this moment of disbelief. And I mean, they did have a lot of drinking the night before, and I've never had a hangover, but I'm sure that they were maybe experiencing some of that. I mean, I don't know. That could be just
okay.
too much in-depth thinking, but
No,
um,
that's fine. I just thought it was kind of sloppy,
yeah, no,
but
I totally get
that's
where you're
just
coming from. I think they could have, or they should have known a little more, a little sooner
Yeah,
about
now
what
it's like,
was
what
going
game were
on.
they playing, though?
I
Like,
have
what
no
game
idea.
that you're killing people? Like, it's so common to have zombies in, like, a first-player shooter,
Yeah,
you know?
yeah,
And
Well, I
then,
mean, even just media in general, like comic books, movies, like books. There's all sorts of media where they would, know
One would
what the
think.
term zombie meant. Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah,
well,
yeah,
let's,
Besides the cranberries.
I'm gonna use Kyle as an example. He knows what a superhero is, but it isn't until like recently where he's really started diving into that superhero genre.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So
That's not the point I'm trying to make. The point in that example would be if Kyle saw someone flying overhead, going to rescue someone, he would identify that as, oh, a superhero.
would you,
That
Kyle?
Maybe.
would not be.
Or maybe they have like a jetpack or some device that's helping them fly.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. I'd have to see it. Maybe there's something on their back that makes me think, oh, maybe they have a jetpack, or maybe there's not something on their back. Thinking, how is that possible? I don't know.
I don't know. Even just like in the most general terms, like somebody stumbling slowly at you, kind of disoriented, is either drunk or zombie. Someone in a cape flying overhead of you is a superhero. That's like the generalization you can draw
I
from
would
that,
have to
I guess.
disagree though.
Well, you
I would,
disagree then.
Yeah.
yeah, I wouldn't think superhero. I'd be like crazy person. The fuck? And then I
Maybe.
wouldn't think zombie right away. I would think crackhead or drunk.
Yeah. And the other thing about it is, zombies are a made-up thing. Like they're not real. They've never been real. There's no
They,
real
I don't think they ever
rules
will.
because they're not real. These are just what the writers, the first person that came up with zombies, this is what they came up with. So they don't know what would actually happen if the undead came back to life and had a knack for eating human flesh. It
I
could
mean, they
be a
could
different
be
thing. It could just be, oh,
dancers.
you just have to kill them. Like it doesn't have to be a brain thing or a removing the head kind of thing. I mean, there's so many different, scenarios where things could be different or like,
Right.
yeah, because I mean, it's just a made up thing, just like a lot
And
of other things.
I want to. I'm reading The Stand by Stephen King right now, and it's basically about how the government they create this basically like a super flu with like I believe a 94.8% kill rate.
Fuck.
Jeez.
Yeah, so like pretty much all of humanity's wiped out, uh, and it's never revealed in this movie how the zombies are coming back, like why they're coming back. It's not even assumed that like it just happens. Like maybe it was like a strain, maybe it's, maybe they're not even zombies really. Maybe they're actual human beings doing this. They lost their mind and they lost their sense of consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Maybe there's a lot of different options, and the movie itself doesn't go into that.
Yeah.
It's just,
But like as the viewer, you're just okay, cool, it's a zombie movie.
yeah,
You just watch it.
yeah,
No background.
Because that's not the important part of the movie. They're not trying to find a cure for it.
yeah.
It's about this guy trying to grow up
Mm-hmm.
And
and shit just
survive.
happens.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I just think the callback humor is on overload throughout this entire
Yeah.
movie. It's too much.
The,
I appreciate a couple of them, but in this movie, it seems like everything's a foreshadow and everything's a callback, and
Yeah.
it's too much.
yeah,
Too much, Bob.
I can see.
Well, just I've seen his other work. I've seen Scott Pilgrim. I've seen Baby Driver, and I think those are improvements on his work here. But I can see like the roots of some of his work in
Well,
this one.
Mhm.
everyone's gonna start somewhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's like this big like puzzle of dialogue and like all these pieces getting put together, and then it's like, oh, we're gonna use this at this point to call back to that one situation and how it differs from when we used it the last time. So it's kind of like just copy and pasting in a way.
Yeah.
But I
Which
think
is good sometimes.
yeah,
But
I
I
think
this
it
movie is a little much.
It's
yeah.
probably like, we discovered this thing. Let's just keep going.
Yeah. I think it's going to work for some people and it's not going to work for others. And I can totally see both sides of it, of why it's annoying or why it's clever. Because, I don't know. It takes a lot to annoy me when it comes to movies. So, I can appreciate, it's like they're just like super aware of what they're writing and what they're saying. I don't know. But yeah, I can see how it can be a little much, especially the foreshadowing. I think that's like it's just so obvious.
So obvious.
Yeah. But yeah, that was Shaun of the Dead. Uh, before we go, Trevor is gonna be the next. He's gonna have the next movie.
You're
Do you want to share?
goddamn right.
We're watching the
Is it
whole
a
Breaking
Clint
Bad
Eastwood
series.
movie?
Yeah.
That sounds great.
El Camino.
Yeah, but
No, that's not what we're watching.
okay,
We will be watching Fargo.
nice.
How far?
So
will you go?
put on your sweaters, bitches.
I got my heated blanket already.
He said
Gotta
sweaters.
say it with a Minnesotan accent, eh?
Well, I do have a sweater on.
I can't really do accents. I'll leave that to you, Hannah.
In Minnesota.
Put your sweaters
can't do it
on and
Get your Tim
we're
Hortons,
going up to Fargo.
All right, so yeah, that's it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.
Yeah, party on.
Bye.
Skabba-da-boo.